Her name was Dorothy Mae Collins, but no one at Mercy General Hospital knew that. To the nurses rushing past, she was just a shadow near the parking garage stairwell. To the security guards, she was the woman they occasionally moved along without making eye contact. To the world, she was invisible. Dorothy was 67 years old, a former school librarian from Memphis who had lost her apartment 2 years ago after a series of medical bills drained everything she had saved over a lifetime. She had no children, no siblings left, and the one friend who might have helped had moved to another state. She ended up in Atlanta with a small bag, a worn Bible, and nowhere to go. The parking garage on the east side of Mercy General Hospital became her shelter. It was covered, relatively safe, and the overnight security guard on the lower level, a tired young man named Antoine, never reported her as long as she stayed quiet and caused no trouble. Dorothy was always quiet. She had spent 30 years keeping order in a library. Silence was something she understood deeply. For 8 months, Dorothy had observed the rhythms of the hospital from her corner of the world. She knew which nurses worked double shifts. She knew which family members cried in their cars before going back inside to pretend they were holding it together. And she knew the young woman who arrived every evening at exactly 6:15, parked in spot number 44 on the second level, and walked quickly toward the main entrance carrying either flowers or a small container of homemade food. Her name, Dorothy eventually learned from overhearing a phone call, was Naomi Carter. She was in her mid-30s, a slender woman with natural hair and tired eyes that still managed to carry warmth in them. Her mother, Grace Carter, had been a patient on the 4th floor for nearly 3 months, battling a serious kidney condition. Every evening without fail, Naomi came. She never missed a day. Dorothy had watched her cry in that car, pray with her hands on the steering wheel, fix her face in the rearview mirror, and then walk inside with her shoulders straight, pretending to be strong for her mother. Something about that quiet, private courage made Dorothy pay attention to Naomi in a way she paid attention to very few people anymore. The moment that changed everything between them happened on a cold Tuesday evening in late October. Naomi had parked as usual and was walking toward the elevator when she nearly stepped over Dorothy, who was sitting against the wall with her bag pulled close. Most people would have kept walking. Some would have called security. Naomi stopped. She looked at Dorothy, not with pity exactly, but with the kind of recognition one tired human being offers another. She reached into the bag she was carrying and pulled out a second container of food, collard greens, cornbread, and a small portion of baked chicken, the kind of meal clearly made from scratch and carried with love. She set it down gently beside Dorothy, said simply, "You look hungry, and I made too much," and walked on without waiting for a thank you. Dorothy sat with that container for a long moment before opening it. It was the first home-cooked meal she had eaten in 4 months. From that evening forward, Naomi brought 2 portions every time she came. She never made a scene of it. She never stopped to have a long conversation or ask probing questions. She just left the food, met Dorothy's eyes briefly with a quiet nod, and continued on her way. It was the most dignified kindness Dorothy had ever received from a stranger. It was a Wednesday night in November, just past midnight, when Dorothy witnessed something she was never meant to see. She had been awake due to the cold, wrapped in 2 donated blankets and sitting near the stairwell door on the 4th floor level of the parking garage, which connected through a side corridor to the hospital's administrative wing. The corridor door was supposed to be locked from the outside, but the latch had been broken for weeks and no one had fixed it. Dorothy had discovered this by accident a month earlier and sometimes slipped inside just to warm up in the hallway for a few minutes before returning to her corner. That night, she had done the same. She was sitting quietly in the dim corridor when she heard footsteps. She pressed herself against the wall behind a large supply cart and stayed still. A man in a white coat walked quickly down the hall and pushed open the door to the patient records room using a key card. Dorothy could see clearly through the narrow gap between the cart and the wall. She recognized him. She had seen him many times on the 4th floor. He was one of the doctors who treated patients in the unit where Naomi's mother was admitted. His name tag read Drive. Philip Holt. Dr. Holt did not turn on the main lights. He used a small flashlight and moved directly to a section of physical chart folders kept in a row of labeled slots along the wall, backup hard copies that the hospital still maintained alongside its digital records. He pulled out one folder, opened it on the counter, and removed several pages. From his coat pocket, he produced what appeared to be replacement pages already printed. He swapped them out, slid the originals into a manila envelope he had brought with him, and replaced the folder in its slot. The entire process took less than 4 minutes. Before leaving, he stood still for a moment and looked around the room slowly, as if checking whether anything appeared disturbed. Then he turned off his flashlight, opened the door quietly, and walked back down the corridor the way he had come. Dorothy did not move for a long time after he left. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. She was not a medical professional and she could not read the details of what had been in those documents. But she had spent 30 years in a library. She understood exactly what it looked like when someone replaced original pages with falsified ones. She had seen it done to archived records once, long ago, by a student trying to alter a checked-out log. The action had its own unmistakable shape. And Dr. Philip Holt had just done it to a patient's medical chart. The chart, she had seen clearly on the folder tab, belonged to Grace Carter, Naomi's mother. Dorothy returned to her corner of the parking garage and sat in the dark for the rest of the night without sleeping. Her mind would not rest. She turned what she had seen over and over, examining it from every angle, the way she used to examine a problem in her library when something did not add up. Why would a doctor replace pages in a patient's physical chart in the middle of the night, alone, using a flashlight? There was no innocent explanation she could construct. A legitimate correction to medical records had a formal process. It required documentation, a supervisor's knowledge, and a dated amendment entry. What she had seen was furtive, deliberate, and hidden. Which meant someone was trying to change what the record said about Grace Carter's treatment or condition, and they were doing it secretly. Dorothy thought about Naomi, who arrived every evening carrying food and flowers and private prayers. She thought about what it would mean if something was being hidden from that family. She thought about what it would mean if she said nothing. She was a homeless woman sleeping in a parking garage. Who would believe her? And yet she also knew that saying nothing when you have witnessed something wrong is its own kind of choice. She had believed that her whole life. She was not about to stop believing it now. The next evening, Dorothy was in her usual spot when Naomi arrived at 6:15 and parked in spot 44. As always, Naomi approached with 2 containers of food. She set one down beside Dorothy, nodded, and turned to leave. This time, Dorothy spoke. She said, "Excuse me, miss." Her voice came out rougher than she intended, unused as it was to full sentences with strangers. Naomi turned around, not alarmed, just attentive. "My name is Dorothy Collins," she said slowly. "I have been here a long time. I know you come every day to see your mother. I need to tell you something that I saw last night, and I need you to listen to me carefully, because I know how this is going to sound." Naomi looked at her for a moment, then sat down on the concrete beside her, right there in the parking garage, without hesitation, without condescension, without any of the wariness Dorothy had braced herself for. She said, "My name is Naomi. Tell me what you saw." That simple willingness to sit down and listen, not out of charity, but out of respect, was what broke something open in Dorothy's chest. She told Naomi everything. The corridor, the broken latch, the flashlight, the replaced pages, the folder tab with Grace Carter's name. She described Drive, Holt and what she had watched him do step by step. Naomi listened without interrupting. When Dorothy finished, neither of them spoke for a full minute. Naomi did not dismiss what Dorothy told her. She went home that night, barely slept, and by morning had contacted a medical malpractice attorney her coworker had once recommended and never forgotten. The attorney, a sharp and methodical woman named Sandra Okafor, advised Naomi not to confront the doctor directly and not to alert the hospital administration yet, warning that if the wrong person was involved in covering something up, records could disappear entirely before anything could be preserved. Instead, Sandra filed an emergency request with the state medical board to preserve all physical and digital records related to Grace Carter's treatment. She simultaneously contacted a hospital patient advocate who was required by law to operate independently of the medical staff. Within 48 hours, a quiet investigation had been opened without drive. Holt's knowledge. Dorothy was asked to provide a formal written statement, which she gave in full. Sandra arranged for her to be brought in properly and treated with complete seriousness. No one questioned Dorothy's credibility on the basis of where she slept. Sandra made sure of that from the first moment. When investigators compared the physical chart with the hospital's automatically backed up digital records, they found exactly what Dorothy had described. 3 pages had been swapped. The originals, recovered through a subpoena of Dr. Holt's personal vehicle and home office, revealed that Grace Carter had been showing signs of a medication reaction 2 weeks earlier, signs that Dr. Holt had documented accurately at the time, then covered up after prescribing a second drug that interacted dangerously with the first. Dr. Philip Holt was suspended within the week pending a full investigation. Grace Carter's treatment was immediately reviewed and corrected by a new medical team. Her condition, which had been quietly worsening without explanation, began to stabilize once the conflicting medication was removed and the proper protocol was restored. The attending physician told Naomi plainly that if the error had continued undetected for another few weeks, the outcome for her mother would have been very serious. Holt had falsified the records to protect himself from a medical negligence complaint he feared was coming, after a colleague had already raised informal concerns about his prescribing patterns. He had believed that altering the physical backup copies in the middle of the night would give him a clean paper trail. He had not counted on Dorothy Mae Collins being awake behind a supply cart in a dim corridor. He lost his medical license. A criminal case for falsifying medical records and reckless endangerment was filed against him by the district attorney's office. The hospital faced its own regulatory review. Through all of it, Dorothy's statement remained the cornerstone of the case. A homeless woman that no one had noticed had seen everything. And she had told the truth with the same precision and calm she had brought to 30 years of keeping careful records in a library. Grace Carter recovered. By January, she was well enough to go home. On the day of her discharge, Naomi brought her mother through the parking garage on the way to the car and stopped at the spot where Dorothy usually sat. Dorothy was there. Grace, still fragile but steady on her feet, looked at this quiet older woman and said nothing for a moment. Then she opened her arms. Dorothy stood up and accepted the embrace of a woman she had never met but had spent months watching love her daughter from a parking garage corner. That evening, Naomi sat with Dorothy for a long time. She had already begun making calls. Within 3 weeks, with Sandra Okafor helping navigate the paperwork and a local nonprofit providing emergency housing assistance, Dorothy moved into a small subsidized apartment 2 miles from the hospital. It had 1 bedroom, a working heater, and a window that looked out onto a quiet street. Naomi helped her carry in the few things she owned, then came back the following Saturday with Grace, and they cooked a full meal together in Dorothy's kitchen. On the small table beside the window, Naomi placed a framed card. It read, "You were never invisible to me." Dorothy looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she smiled and went to set the table for 3. Because kindness, when it is real and when it is returned, does not just save 1 life. It quietly rebuilds several, 1 small honest act at a time.